Hi, Cultivation crew. This is going to be session 3, Pollinating. We're almost done. We only have one more session after this, and that's going to be the cherry on top, talking about the fruits and veggies that come from pollinating. But this week, we're going to be talking about how those fruits and veggies get there. And we're going to be talking about pollination. So when you think about pollination, you normally think about one specific animal that does it really well. Most people do. It's a bee. We think of bees as pollinators. We know that bees pollinate. And bees are able to do it really well and do it very often. And so that's normally what people just think of as pollinators, but there's actually many, many different kinds of pollinators, and bees are not all that there is. And bees can't even pollinate every different type of flower or plant. So we're going to be talking about some of those. We're also going to say, a lot of times when people think of pollinators, they think of honeybees. Honeybees are actually kind of terrible pollinators. They aren't really very good at what they do. So an interesting thing about honeybees is, we obviously live in America. Honeybees were not supposed to live here. Honeybees are actually from across the world, the other side of the world, from Europe and Africa. Honeybees were never intended to live in America. And the reason that they do is because people brought them over in order to make honey, which is awesome. Because believe it or not, most bees actually don't make honey. There are very few species of bees that actually produce honey, and honeybees is one of the only kinds. And so people brought them over to America in order to produce honey, which is great. But people think that honeybees are their pollination option, and honeybees aren't really very good at it. So we're going to talk about what makes some bees really good at pollination. Real quickly, here's a little video that I took in my backyard with my daylilies, and I'm going to show you the very simple explanation of how pollination works.
So right here we have some daylilies. And you can see a lot of the different parts we saw in the video. These are the petals. And then up here are the anthers and the pistil. So if you can see right there, the pistil is this long, thin part right here. And the anthers are right next to it. So the goal of pollination is that the flower needs some of the pollen from here on these little anthers to go over to this little pistil. That's the goal of pollination. And you can see, if we get really close here, that yellow on the pistil, that's the pollen that I just got on there, and it's gonna stick like glue. So then just like we saw in the video, little bits of that pollen are gonna travel down this pistil all the way to the bottom. And then as the flower closes up and dies, it's gonna start making that fruit, those next seeds in the base here.
So now that you've seen my very short and simple explanation on pollination, I recommend you watch those videos with that SciShow lady because they are really helpful to understand how the whole process works, and they've got cool illustrations instead of you just watching me do it with my finger. But I would recommend, if you go outside, find some daylilies, find some dandelions, find some flowers, and pollinate yourself a little bit. If you don't want to use your finger, that's fine. You can use a Q-tip, and you just want to dab a little bit of the pollen off, and you're going to put it on the pistil of a different flower of the same kind. But something really important here is some flowers don't have the pollen just out on display. Some flowers have their pollen locked down inside the anther and held there. So how do pollinators get it out? How do they spread the pollen? And this is where the bumblebee comes in. So we know that bumblebees are bigger than honeybees. Honeybees are going to be small. Bumblebees are the really chunky ones. I've heard them called sky pandas before, that literally bumble around and run into everything always and make a lot of noise. Well, the reason they make a lot of noise is that bumblebees aren't supposed to be able to fly. Scientifically, scientists cannot prove why bumblebees can get off the ground because their wings are too small to be able to carry that body, but they do. And they do it because their wings are going so fast, hundreds of times per second. So those bumblebees get their fat little body off the ground and they go buzz around to different flowers. Now, the flowers of potatoes, tomatoes, blueberries, different things that we have been eating for years can only be pollinated by bumblebees. And here's why. A bumblebee will grab the anther of a flower that has the pollen locked inside, and they will vibrate their wings. And this vibration is so fast that as the bee holds on and bites down, it shakes the pollen out of that special enclosed anther. So without bumblebees and their what we call buzz pollination, we wouldn't have any blueberries, potatoes, tomatoes, or a bunch of other things. So we need bumblebees specifically to do that job. So that's one reason why bumblebees can do things that honeybees can't do. Some other pollinators that you might not think of are birds and butterflies are really good at this. A lot of animals, like honeybees, are going for the nectar, not the pollen. Bumblebees want the pollen. The pollen is their food. Honeybees want the nectar, that sweet liquid that's down inside the flower, and that's how they make honey. Well, either way, when they're going for the nectar or the pollen, they get all up inside the rest of the pollen. So when you might see a hummingbird drinking out of a flower, they're getting pollen all the way down their beak as they go for the nectar inside the flower. When you look at a butterfly walking around on flowers, again, going for that nectar to drink, they're walking all over the pollen. So as they fly from flower to flower, they're spreading it. These are some common pollinators we might think of. What you might not think of is a lemur. Lemurs are really good pollinators for very specific types of trees. So if you think of a lemur, they are kind of like a monkey. They swing through the trees. They live in Madagascar. So these black and white ruffed lemurs, they pollinate traveler's trees. They can also be called traveler's palm. These trees are super tall, usually 40 feet high, and the lemurs use their hands to pull open the parts of the flower with the pollen inside. Then they stick their super long snouts and tongues down into the nectar at the bottom to take a drink, and while they do that, they get pollen all over their snout. And as they do this, going from flower to flower, they spread the pollen. So these lemurs are officially the world's largest pollinators since they are pretty big. Another bigger one, these are called honey possums. They live in Australia. They're really cute. And they pollinate banksia and eucalyptus flowers. And much like the lemur, they're able to do this because as they stick their long snout down into there, they get pollen all over their nose and don't bother to clean it off before heading over to the next flower. There's also tropical bats that do this. So when we think of the bats here, they eat mosquitoes. You might have heard of vampire bats that actually drink blood. But these tropical bats usually drink nectar from flowers. And so again, these tropical bats, as they drink the nectar, are pollinating through their nose. Another cool pollinator is a specific type of skink. This is a little tiny lizard. It's called the naranja skink, and they live in Brazil. So they drink the nectar in the flowers of the malungu tree. And these skinks literally climb into the flowers so that they can reach the nectar. And then the little scales on the skink catch the pollen and they spread it to the next flower. There are geckos that pollinate flax flowers. There are different lizards that pollinate. There are so many different species of insects that pollinate just as they're looking for food. Pollinators are everywhere, and we need them to survive. So make sure that you're planting flowers in your garden that are going to help our pollinators grow. The last thing we're going to talk about in this video today is mason bees, and I'm including these specifically because we're actually going to be making mason bee houses or apartment complexes for our in-person project this week. Mason bees are not what you would expect out of a bee. I think normally people think bees have black and yellow. Mason bees are really kind of blue-black. They're really pretty, and they really can't hurt you. So male mason bees cannot sting. Female mason bees are so small that when they do sting, which is hardly ever, they'd have to be really mad at you. It feels like a mosquito bite. So these are really small bees, smaller than the bees we're used to. They're not aggressive. They're usually super safe to have around kids like you guys. And we're going to make our little complexes for them. So when we think of normal bees, the honeybees and the bumblebees that we're used to, you can learn more about them in the video that we've attached with this newsletter. Those bees, as the video will teach you, build hives. They're social bees. So in those hives, in those colonies, they normally have one queen, and that's the female that lays all the eggs, and then the worker bees take care of those eggs, those babies, and take care of finding the food. Mason bees and most other bees don't work like that. So mason bees are gregarious bees. That word means that they like to be around other bees. It doesn't bother them, but they don't need any other bees to make their babies and to live. So the way that mason bees work is when a female bee is ready to lay her eggs, she will go into a hollow reed or a house like we're going to build, and she will build a little wall inside that little hollow straw made of mud. She will build a little mud wall, and then she will go out and she will collect pollen, and she'll make a little pollen ball, little pollen nectar ball that's going to feed her baby. And she'll go put that in the hole. It's about the size of a pea. And when she's made that, she can lay her egg. And then she builds up a little mud wall to keep the baby safe inside. And then she does that again until the entire reed is full of little baby bees. So how deep the bee is actually decides if it's going to be a boy or a girl bee. The girl bees are usually further closer to the back, so you will not get any female bees if you use really short straws. They will only be male bees. So you want to make sure the straws are long enough. And these mason bees, we want to help them because they're important pollinators too. Again, like bumblebees, they're better pollinators than honeybees are. And this is because when honeybees get pollen, it sticks to these little wet sacs on their body, and so it doesn't get knocked loose very easily into other flowers. Mason bees are a straight up mess. So if we look at some pictures of mason bees here, mason bees are just hairy and they just waddle right into those flowers and they get the pollen everywhere. It sticks to everything, and so then when they head to the next flower, they again get it everywhere, which is exactly what the flower needs. So I hope that helped you like mason bees a little bit more. I think they're super cool. And be sure to watch the other videos included in this video or in this newsletter just to get a better idea. So I hope to see you guys tomorrow to build your mason bee houses. And I hope that you enjoy learning about pollinators.